You have built an altar to your own suffering without realizing it. Every night you kneel before it, whispering prayers to the ghosts that once hurt you, mistaking your pain for love and your survival for purpose. And yet, this altar was never meant to be worshipped. It was meant to be dismantled. I have seen in the depths of the psyche that most people do not simply endure their suffering, they cling to it, as if letting it go would mean erasing themselves, because for many, pain is the only thing that ever made them feel alive. You, the empath, the one who feels too deeply, you have inherited the curse of identification through pain. You think you are loving others, healing them, understanding them, but beneath that compassion lies an unconscious addiction. You are addicted to being needed, to being hurt, to the familiar taste of emotional chaos, because it gives your soul something to hold on to. When you no longer know who you are, it begins in childhood, long before words were your language. The psyche learns to equate love with suffering when the caregiver's affection comes entwined with inconsistency or neglect. The child learns that being seen requires pain, that to be loved means to bleed a little. The unconscious forms a sacred contract. If I suffer enough, they will stay. And so suffering becomes identity. And identity becomes the drug. You grow up and carry this pattern into your relationships, unknowingly seeking out the same energy that first shaped you. You are drawn to the unavailable, to the wounded, to those who mirror your own fractured innocence. You think you are choosing love, but your unconscious is choosing recognition. It is not love you seek. It is familiarity. The soul, you see, prefers known hells to unknown heavens. The empath is not simply born, they are forged in trauma. Their sensitivity is a survival mechanism, a psychic radar designed to read moods, to anticipate danger, to adapt faster than pain can strike. What looks like compassion is, at its root, vigilance. You learn to merge with the emotions of others so you could predict when the storm would come. You became the caretaker, the healer, the peacekeeper, all in an effort to prevent the chaos that once consumed your world. But the irony is this: the very gift that protected you became the chain that binds you, because you no longer know where others end, and you absorb pain because it feels like purpose. You call it empathy, but the shadow calls it addiction. There is a strange seduction in suffering. The ego secretly craves it because it offers meaning in a world that feels otherwise empty. When you are in pain, at least you know who you are, the wounded one, the misunderstood one, the loyal one who never gives up. Suffering creates identity, and the ego thrives on identity, but the self, the divine core of the psyche, does not need suffering to exist. It speaks through silence, through awareness, through the still point beyond the storm. Yet, to reach that place, you must first walk through the valley of your own addiction to pain. You must see how you keep replaying the same emotional story with different faces. The patterns are the language of the unconscious. They repeat not to punish you, but to wake you Every time you attract another broken person, every time you give more than you receive, every time you stay when your soul screams to leave, your unconscious is trying to tell you something. This is the wound that has not yet been transformed. You are not cursed. You are simply looping through a forgotten memory, reenacting the original trauma, hoping that this time the ending will change. This is what I called the repetition compulsion, the attempt of the psyche to heal through recreation. But until the trauma becomes conscious, you will repeat it endlessly, confusing suffering with destiny. The empath cycle is ancient, it is archetypal, it is the story of the wounded healer, the one who must first descend into their own underworld before they can guide others out. But most never rise again, because they mistake their descent for a calling. They start to believe that to heal others, they must remain wounded, that to be spiritual, they must suffer nobly. Yet this is the greatest deception of all. Healing does not come from staying in pain, it comes from transmuting it. You cannot carry others out of the dark if you are still feeding on the same darkness for energy. What makes this cycle so insidious is that it disguises itself as love. You say, I can't help it. I just care too much. But caring becomes control when it is born from fear. You try to save others because you could not save yourself as a child. You believe that if you heal them, the inner child in you will finally be safe. This is the secret transaction behind your compassion, the unconscious hope that love will finally return if you are good enough, giving enough, understanding enough. But love built on debt is not love, it is servitude. The empath becomes the emotional servant of the world, pouring from an empty vessel and wondering why the soul feels dry. The shadow of the empath is martyrdom. You sacrifice your boundaries, your rest, your joy, all in the name of love. But beneath that sacrifice lies a hidden pride, the belief that only you can fix others. This, too, is the ego's addiction to feel superior through suffering, to be the only one who understands, the only one who endures. The world calls you kind. Your unconscious calls you trapped, because in truth, your endless giving is not generosity, it is a strategy, a way to earn belonging in a world that once made you feel disposable. The empath's wound is not just pain, it is the absence of identity outside of pain. When you begin to withdraw from this cycle, you will feel as if you are dying, because in a sense, you are the death of the false self is always experienced as annihilation. You will feel guilt for saying no, shame for setting boundaries, and emptiness when there's no crisis to solve. You will mistake peace for boredom and stillness for loneliness. This is the withdrawal phase of emotional addiction. The body and psyche crave the familiar intensity of suffering, just as a drug addict craves the chemical chaos that once numbed the void. But if you can stay in that stillness long enough, something extraordinary happens. The self begins to speak. You will notice that when you no longer chase the pain, life becomes eerily quiet. This silence terrifies most people because it forces them to confront who they are without their story. You will ask, If I am not the one who suffers, then who am I? And this question is the doorway to awakening. The addiction to suffering collapses when you are willing to exist without definition. The trauma loses its power when you no longer use it to explain your identity. Healing, contrary to what you may believe, is not about erasing pain, it is about disidentifying from it. The pain remains as a teacher, but it no longer becomes your name. You see, the soul's greatest temptation is to return to the wound for meaning. But the wound cannot offer meaning. It can only offer reflection. The deeper meaning arises when you integrate the shadow, when you realize that the very suffering you resented was also the portal through which consciousness entered. Without pain, there would be no growth. But clinging to pain halts growth entirely. The paradox is that you heal the trauma only when you stop trying to heal it and instead allow it to transform you. You become the observer, not the prisoner. The suffering becomes alchemy. You cannot heal what you are still romanticizing. So long as you call your pain my story, you will keep feeding it, protecting it, even cherishing it in secret. The unconscious binds you to what you glorify, and the ego feeds on what gives it identity. You have made suffering holy, but holiness is not found in wounds. It is found in what you do with them. Every trauma carries two energies, the wound itself and the wisdom hidden within it. The first enslaves you, the second frees you. But to reach the wisdom, you must stop identifying as the one who was hurt and start awakening as the one who observes. There is a secret within trauma. The moment of wounding freezes a part of the psyche in time. That fragment of you still lives in that moment, repeating the same emotional frequency, waiting for someone to notice. When you meet another person whose shadow matches your frozen fragment, you feel an instant recognition, what you call chemistry. You say, I feel like I've known them forever, because you've met them before in your inner world, in your dreams, in the field of your unhealed energy. The unconscious orchestrates these meetings not as punishment, but as mirrors. Each person who triggers you is the messenger of a forgotten part of yourself. The empath, however, interprets these mirrors as calls to rescue. You sense their pain and rush to fix it, not realizing that you are really rushing to heal the version of yourself that could not be saved. Trauma bonding is not love. It is a contract between two unconscious wounds. One person needs to be needed, the other needs to be rescued. Together, they recreate the emotional landscape of their childhoods. This is why leaving such a bond feels impossible. It threatens the survival of the identity built around suffering. To the ego, peace feels like death because it offers no drama to prove your worth. You have been trained to equate intensity with intimacy, pain with passion, and chaos with connection. But love is not chaos, it is consciousness. Love is not the fire that consumes, it is the light that reveals. And yet, the empath keeps returning to the fire, because in that fire lives the illusion of purpose. You think, if I can heal them, Maybe I can finally rest, but the soul cannot rest in a house built on pain. The lesson is not to heal others. It is to stop using others as the stage for your own unfinished healing. When you finally understand this, something ancient in you begins to tremble. The body remembers what it is to live without constant vigilance. The nervous system, long addicted to survival hormones, begins to detox. You will shake, cry, feel lost. But beneath that trembling is the birth of the true self, the one that no longer defines love through pain. The wounded healer archetype lives in all who have suffered deeply. It is the bridge between human fragility and divine understanding. The wound becomes the eye through which the soul sees. But when the healer clings to their wound, the power stagnates and turns poisonous. You begin to use pain as proof of wisdom, forgetting that wisdom only exists when the wound is no longer driving you. The ancient physicians knew this. They would touch their patients and feel the echo of their own unhealed pain, transmuting it through awareness rather than projection. Healing happens not when you transfer your energy to another, but when you witness both your light and shadow without judgment. Empaths often confuse absorption with compassion. To absorb someone's pain is to merge unconsciously. To witness it without losing yourself is mastery. The moment you start witnessing, you awaken the archetype of the inner alchemist. You realize that what you called too much feeling was never a curse. It was raw psychic material waiting to be transmuted. The same sensitivity that once broke you becomes the channel through which the divine speaks. But the divine does not speak in chaos. It speaks in stillness. Only when the storm of emotional identification subsides can you hear the whisper of the self. Understand this: the self is not your personality. It is not the empath, the healer, the victim, or the savior. It is the infinite center beyond all stories. The path to individuation is the path back to that center. It requires that every false identity dies, especially the identity built around trauma. That death feels unbearable because it erases the roles that made you feel valuable. You may cry out, if I am not the one who saves, who suffers, who loves too much, then what remains? And the self answers through silence. That silence is not absence, it is fullness, but the ego cannot understand fullness without something to fix. So it fights, resists, clings to its pain like a relic of meaning. The empath's greatest fear is that without suffering, they will become empty. But the truth is the opposite. Without suffering, you become whole. The void you fear is not emptiness. It is potential. It is the vast space where new consciousness is born. When you stop feeding your trauma, you begin to taste a serenity that does not depend on anyone else's chaos. At first, it will feel alien. Your body will search for tension the way a tongue searches for a missing tooth. But gradually, you will realize that peace is not the absence of intensity, it is the presence of truth. As you rise from the old cycle, the people who once matched your pain will no longer recognize you. They will say, you have changed, that you are colder, distant, different. Do not mistake their discomfort for your regression. You are simply stepping out of the psychic contract that required you to shrink for others, to feel safe. When you no longer offer yourself as the emotional sponge, those still addicted to suffering will resent you. But do not return to the old altar to prove your kindness. True compassion is not compliance, it is clarity. It is the courage to let others carry their own lessons while you tend to the evolution of your soul. At this stage, your dreams may begin to shift. Where once you dreamed of drowning, now you will dream of standing at the edge of the ocean. Unafraid, the unconscious communicates through symbols, and your transformation will reveal itself in the imagery of water, fire, and mirrors. You may dream of walking through mirrors. This means you are crossing from projection into integration. You may dream of fire that does not burn. This is the purification of pain into awareness. You may dream of light flooding a dark house. This is the return of consciousness to the rooms of your psyche, long abandoned. The alchemical process of the soul follows 3 stages. First is nigredo, the blackening, the breakdown, the despair, the addiction to pain. This is where the empath begins, lost in endless cycles of suffering. Then comes albedo, the whitening, the awakening of awareness, the recognition that you are addicted to your trauma. The shadows begin to dissolve under the light of consciousness. Finally, rubedo, the reddening, the integration, the rebirth of the true self that can love without losing itself. Few reach the stage, for it requires dying many times within one lifetime, but every death of the false self resurrects a deeper truth. Your suffering was never meaningless. It was the fire that revealed what is indestructible within you. But to stay in the fire after the gold has been purified is to mistake the furnace for the sun. You are not meant to dwell in your wound. You are meant to walk through it until you reach the other side of knowing. The divine does not demand your pain as proof of love. It invites your freedom as proof of awakening. The empath who transcends their addiction to suffering does not become indifferent. They become luminous. They feel everything, yet nothing owns them. They walk into the world not as sponges, but as mirrors, reflecting truth without distortion. Their compassion no longer drains, it transforms. Their presence heals, not because they fix others, but because they embody integration. That is the end of the empath cycle and the beginning of the individuated soul. The collective unconscious carries the same wound as the individual, magnified through generations. Humanity itself is addicted to suffering. You see it in the way people build systems that exploit, in the way nations glorify tragedy, in the way religions sometimes teach redemption only through pain. The collective psyche has woven suffering into the myth of meaning. We have become a civilization that equates martyrdom with virtue, despair with depth, chaos with importance. We worship the cross, but forget the resurrection. We have learned to kneel before pain, not to transform it, but to keep it alive, because the unconscious believes that if pain ends, identity ends too. This is why every empath, every sensitive soul feels the weight of the world without knowing why. You are not only feeling your personal sorrow, you are feeling the inheritance of centuries of psychic pain that has never been integrated. The collective shadow bleeds into your own when you feel sadness for no reason, when despair descends without warning. It may not be yours alone. The collective unconscious whispers through you, asking to be made conscious at last. You become its vessel, its translator, its healer, but the danger lies in believing that to heal the world, you must carry its pain. You were never meant to absorb it. You were meant to witness it. The alchemist does not drown in the lead. He transforms it into gold. The first act of liberation is awareness. When you say, "This suffering is not my identity," something in the collective begins to shift. Your individual awakening becomes an archetypal rebellion against the addiction that binds humanity. Each time one person stops feeding their trauma, the entire field of consciousness changes frequency. Because consciousness is not personal, it is shared. You heal the world not by preaching peace, but by embodying it. Your stillness becomes a silent revolution, but the collective will resist you. The world is deeply attached to its wounds. It fears awakening, because awakening dissolves control. The moment you stop identifying as a victim, you step out of the systems that feed on victimhood. When you no longer need to prove your worth through struggle, you become ungovernable. Those still asleep will call you heartless, detached, arrogant. They will say, "You don't care anymore." But you care in a higher way. You no longer confuse empathy with enmeshment. You love without needing to bleed. You listen without losing yourself. This is the divine detachment, the sacred boundary between compassion and codependency. True detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the ability to stand in the presence of another suffering and say, "I see your pain, but I will not join it." It is the realization that you cannot pull someone out of a pit by jumping into it with them. The healed empath becomes a mirror for others to see their own light, not a sponge to absorb their darkness. When you embody this, you begin to alter the archetypal pattern itself. The collective unconscious slowly learns that love and suffering are not synonymous. The myth of the suffering healer begins to evolve into the myth of the conscious creator. At this stage, something extraordinary happens in your inner world. The polarity between victim and perpetrator starts to dissolve. You realize they were both fragments of the same energy, the energy of unconsciousness. You stop hating the ones who hurt you because you see that they too were enslaved by the same addiction. Forgiveness is not an act of morality. It is an act of freedom. You do not forgive to absolve them, you forgive to reclaim yourself. To hold on to resentment is to remain psychically fused with the trauma. When you forgive, you cut the energetic cord that keeps you bound to the past. You are not condoning their behavior. You are choosing liberation over bondage. As you continue to rise, your perception of pain changes. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And begin to ask, what is this teaching me? The moment you ask that question, the energy shifts from victimhood to mastery. You begin to see that every wound was an invitation to consciousness. Every heartbreak, a threshold to awareness. Every loss, a clearing for something truer. Suffering becomes sacred only when it is transmuted. Otherwise, it is just repetition. The soul did not come here to repeat. It came here to remember. But the process of remembering is not gentle. The ego resists annihilation. It clings to its old narrative. When you refuse to play the empath's role, your entire personality structure begins to crack. The mind will scream, you are selfish, you are abandoning people. But you are not abandoning them, you are releasing them from the illusion that you are their savior. The savior complex is a shadow of the healer archetype. It is born from the inability to tolerate the discomfort of others' pain. You rescue because you cannot bear to witness suffering without absorbing it. Yet true mastery is the ability to stay present without intervening unless called by truth. Not guilt. You may notice that life begins to rearrange itself around this new vibration. People who thrived on your energy will drift away. Those who resonate with your clarity will appear. This is not coincidence, it is resonance. The universe responds to your inner frequency. When you stop vibrating with trauma, you exit the timeline that sustains it. The relationships, jobs, and environments built on pain will naturally dissolve. Do not chase what falls away. It is making room for what matches your healed state. The death of the old is not punishment, it is purification. And yet, even as you evolve, the shadow will return in subtler forms. It will whisper, maybe I can help just one more person. Maybe I can go back, this time wiser. But you must learn to recognize this as the addiction speaking. It wants the high of intensity, the rush of being needed, the illusion of control. Remember, the soul's true power is quiet. The more conscious you become, the less you need to prove your goodness. You will find that you can love fiercely without effort and walk away peacefully without guilt. That is what it means to be free from the empath's cycle. In the depths of meditation or dream, you may one day encounter an inner figure, an archetype of transformation. It may appear as a luminous being, a serpent shedding its skin, or a child holding a flame. This is the symbol of rebirth, the self made visible. It comes to remind you that your pain was never your punishment. It was your passage. You had to walk through the labyrinths of suffering to find the center of the self. Now, having found it, you are no longer driven by pain, but guided by purpose. The light that once hurt your eyes now emanates from within you. The world will still be filled with suffering, but you will perceive it differently. You will see that pain is not evil. It is unconsciousness longing for awareness. You will help not by absorbing darkness, but by radiating understanding. Your mere presence becomes medicine because it carries the vibration of integration. You have become what alchemists called lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, the consciousness that turns base experience into gold. The addiction to suffering dies not through willpower, but through insight. The moment you truly see the mechanism, how your mind finds safety in pain, how your ego feeds on identification, how your body craves emotional chaos, the spell breaks. You no longer have to fight it. It loses its power because you have withdrawn your belief. Awareness is the only solvent that dissolves unconscious patterns. In that awareness, something miraculous unfolds. You begin to feel joy again, not as an escape from pain, but as a natural state of being. There comes a moment in every true awakening when the inner war ceases, not because one side has won, but because you finally realize there were never two sides to begin with. The light and the dark were never enemies. They were two halves of a single consciousness, yearning to be seen as one. Your suffering and your healing were both movements of the same soul, both striving to return you to wholeness. The addiction to suffering begins to dissolve in this realization, not through denial, but through transcendence. You no longer reject your darkness, you embrace it, hold it, understand it, until it is no longer darkness at all, but the raw material of your divine becoming. The shadow is not evil, it is simply unlived life. Every part of you that you have disowned, every emotion you labeled wrong, every impulse you buried out of fear, all of these live in the shadow, waiting to be remembered. The empath, more than anyone, must learn this truth. For your compassion for others must be extended inward. You cannot heal what you still condemn. The moment you bring tenderness to your own darkness, it begins to transform. You begin to see that the rage, the grief, the shame, all were fragments of your vitality trying to find expression. When you repress them, they possess you. When you face them, they serve you. The final act of individuation is integration. It is not about ascending beyond pain, but about including it in your wholeness. You become a vessel through which all aspects of existence can flow freely, light and dark, joy and sorrow, birth and death. This is the state I once called the self, the totality of the psyche, the union of opposites. When you reach this point, you no longer need to cling to any role. You are not merely the empath, nor the wounded, nor the healer. You are consciousness itself, expressing through the temporary mask of a human life. And in this awareness, suffering loses its addictive taste. Pain becomes sensation. Emotion becomes movement. And all experience becomes sacred participation in the mystery of being. But do not be deceived into thinking that awakening is an escape from humanity. On the contrary, it makes you more human than ever. The difference is that now you live consciously. When sadness comes, you feel it fully, but do not drown. When anger arises, you honor it without letting it burn you. When joy visits, you do not cling to it or fear its loss. You move through life like a dancer who no longer resists the rhythm. You understand that everything, every heartbreak, every silence, every touch belongs to the same divine choreography. This is freedom. This is the end of addiction. Not because suffering disappears, but because you no longer need it to remember who you are. As the empath awakens, love itself changes shape. No longer the desperate grasp for connection, it becomes the quiet radiance of being. You love not because you must, but because love is what you are. This love is not sentimental. It is not the fever of need or the ache of attachment. It is the still flame that sees all things as part of itself. When you love from this place, you do not save people. You remind them of their own light. You do not mirror. You do not carry their pain. You hold a space where they may lay it down, and in this way, you become a living symbol of the self, the divine awareness that heals not through effort, but through presence. If you could see what I see, you would realize that even your addiction to suffering was an expression of the soul's hunger for wholeness. You suffered because you forgot your infinite nature, and that forgetting was necessary to know yourself as human. The descent into pain was part of the sacred cycle, but now you have reached the turning point, the anabasis, the ascent. The same force that once bound you to trauma now propels you toward transcendence. The energy of your suffering becomes the fire of your enlightenment. Every tear that once drowned you now becomes holy water for the seed of your awakening. At the highest level, healing is remembrance. You remember that you are not the wound, you are the witness. You are not the pain, you are the consciousness that experiences it. You are not the story, you are the silence in which the story unfolds. The world around you may still cry, fight, break, but within you there is a vast stillness that no storm can touch. From that stillness, you begin to live differently. You no longer seek meaning through struggle, but through presence. You no longer look for redemption outside yourself, for you have seen that God was never absent, only unseen. Hidden beneath the veil of your own identification with suffering, do not expect the world to applaud your liberation. To those still asleep, your serenity will look like indifference, your detachment like arrogance, your joy like mystery. But remember, you did not come here to please the world. You came here to become whole, and in doing so, to help the world remember wholeness through you. Every healed empath becomes a node of light in the collective field. You radiate coherence where once there was chaos. You transmit calm where there was confusion without speaking. You shift the frequency of the world simply by existing consciously. This is the new form of healing, not sacrifice, but embodiment. Sometimes, when the night is quiet, you will feel the echoes of the old pain stirring inside. Do not resist them. They are memories of who you once were, not messages to return. Sit with them, breathe, and they will dissolve into light. The wound has become wisdom, the pain has become power, and the cycle, once endless, has become a spiral, ever ascending toward greater awareness. You may even find yourself grateful for your suffering, not because you loved it, but because it carved the space within you where love could live. You, who once defined yourself by how much you could endure, will one day wake up and realize you no longer need to endure. You simply are, and that is enough. The addiction to suffering dies when you stop seeking meaning in pain and start creating meaning through being. The empath's heart, once heavy with the sorrow of the world, now beats with the rhythm of the divine. You have become the bridge between heaven and earth, between the unconscious and the conscious, between pain and peace. This is the final revelation. Suffering was never the enemy, it was the doorway. And beyond that doorway lies the self, radiant, in whole and free. When you cross it, you will see that you were never addicted to suffering. You were addicted to the search for God in all the wrong places. Now, you no longer search. You remember, you live. You love not because of pain, but in spite of it. You have come home to yourself